So how do we go from, being this fan of Age of Empires to modding the game to officially working on it?
So yeah, that's a fun story. I've told it quite a few times, but I happily told it.
I want to hear it.
Great. So I think in 2012, roughly around that time, I started to mod Age of Empires 2 and kind of look, hey, what are the possibilities with this game? Because I love the game. And I saw people making cool graphics and making new scenarios and telling their own stories. And the one thing that was still missing was new civilizations. That was not possible through modding yet. So I looked around a bit, and there was this one guy, and I think he was from Taiwan, and he wrote a guide, but it was in Chinese, on how to add a new civilization to Age of Empires 2. And I looked it up, and then with Google Translate, I tried to figure out what he was actually doing. And then I think after a few days, I managed to add like one civilization to the game. It was just a placeholder. It didn't do anything. There were so many bugs. It could crash most of the time. Right. But there was a slot that said new civ. And I could click it and I could play with it. So I was like, this is amazing. We can do something with it. And then I got in touch with a lot of people who were kind of working on things modding. Like, oh, I have this architecture set and I'm replacing an existing one. And I was like, well, now we can add a new one, actually, and add a new civ along with it. And then that group kind of grew and grew and grew. And we made a first mod/expansion. We put that on our website. We released it. And it was very popular. Like, we released it at, I think it was around Christmas. That was a terrible idea. Never release anything around Christmas. It was, the website went down immediately because it was, so successful. And then after some time, we had like 1 million downloads.
Wow.
For the mod. And I was like, that's just insane.
How many people were on this little team of, modders, and how long did it take you to create this first mod?
Well, the fun thing was there was a lot of like existing things that we were like, oh, let's just throw these things together. There were people who had been working on an Italian architecture set for years at this point, and we were like, well, let's put it in there. Are you guys okay with that? And they were like, yeah, sure, let's do it.
Right.
And that's why it didn't take that long, because there was so much existing stuff that we could now condense into one project. But if I just look at the people that were really core to it, I would say like 5 to 8 people, something like that.
That's not as much as I thought it would be, to be honest. I thought it'd be like 50 to 100 people. For how good the game is, how good the quality is, and all that stuff, I would imagine it'd be a much bigger team. But
it was a mod at the time. There were so many things that were off with it, and especially like the first version, like we improved so much over time. And also because we combined so many existing projects. If we count those people in there as well, you would easily get 20 or more people. That's for sure. And then we went to Microsoft and we were like, well, we had this mod here that seems to be doing quite fine. And you guys are just working on the HD edition at the time. Because it was like the first remaster on Steam for Age of Empires 2. We were like, hey, can we work together somehow? And after some time, they replied to it and they were like, yeah, let's do something. And that's kind of how it started. Like,
did you have that vision originally when you first started modding? Was there any bigger plan? Would you think, oh, wow, we can sell this idea to Microsoft and we can go from there?
No, absolutely not. At first, it was really just like for the fun of it. There were so many people. It's more about, as a modder, it's more about a personal goal. Like, hey, we want to do this with the game because we really like the game. And we think this would be really cool to add to the game. But we never had the intention to go to Microsoft initially. Also because when we started this, we had no idea that Microsoft was doing anything with Age of Empires at all.
Right.
So,
but the problem with AOE was not necessarily the add-ons, because the add-ons were cool, the stories, the HD graphics. The biggest problem was, I would say, the quality of life updates, which every time I went back to the game, I was like, this is great, but I still can't select more than 30 units. I still can't queue up farms. There was so many things that made this a modern RTS that gave it real longevity.
Yeah.
Was that something you always had in mind to fix?
Not at all, actually, because the mod that we did was really just focused on adding more to the game. And we were very lucky at the time. There was this group, and they were doing the user patch project. And user patch, what they basically did is they tried to add some of those things. They were like, let's add resolution options. Because back then, the only options was like going to 124 by 768. Exactly. Yeah. Like
you have to imagine. It's like you're watching this and then all of a sudden you have this massive view change.
Exactly. And that was one of the things. It was like, okay, this is bringing the game to a more modern standard. And that was all thanks to this user patch program and the amazing people that worked on it.
That's awesome.
So I think they, if anything, like that group is mostly responsible for keeping the game more updated back in the day. We were more about the content and the balance, and they were more about, hey, let's add some quality of life features.
Yeah, those are huge. Was there any new sense of pressure? Because you go from a modder just having fun, trying to fix the game to now I have a product. Now this is a business. I have to make this work and I have to make this profitable. What was that like?
So the profitable part, that was luckily not something for us to worry about. It's all Microsoft. It's their game. It's their IP. So they're the ones that kind of do all the budgetary things. But what I really liked from our end is in our cooperation with Microsoft, it was very clear from the start that they gave us a lot of creative freedom. And they were like, hey, you want to do this? Go do it. We'll sort out the rest.
Awesome.
And they were a very good publisher in that sense. And indeed, there was a lot of responsibility and like, hey, the game needs to work. The game needs to run well. You need to make sure that people are happy because they paid for it now. They just didn't grab it for free and they didn't have, too many expectations. But now they do. So that was definitely something where we had to grow. But again, we were really supported by Microsoft, who, of course, have been doing this for I don't know how many years. So.
Right. It's such a rare story in gaming with more microtransactions and all these other ways to get into gaming. You have a bunch of people that really love the game. You have a company that really cares about, this is one of their best IPs, arguably one of their best games ever made. And they want to make sure it's represented properly. And you have a nice community. I mean, it's just, to me, that's why I love Age of Empires. It's just the all around, It's got everything, it's a fantastic product. What are some limitations? What are some of the biggest limitations you had with Age of Empires 2 that maybe even today you can't quite fix or change?
The biggest challenge, and that is absolutely still present today, is how technical can I go here?
So I'm gonna try to listen and understand, but I'm gonna tell you what I don't.
All right. So it's mostly the engine. So the engine that we now use for the Definitive Edition is the same engine that was used for the HD Edition, which is the same engine that was used for the original game back in 1999, which is based on the engine from Age of Empires 1 from 1997, which, as far as I know, was first started in, I'm going to say, around 1995.
Wow.
So we still have code in there from 1995. That's a long time. And going into that code standards have changed. Way of engineering has changed. And even though the engine is absolutely marvelous and was absolutely marvelous at the time, nowadays people just program differently, hardware is differently, and the software you write for that hardware also behaves differently. So we run into so many issues with legacy codes it's sometimes very hard to maintain features.
Yeah.
Like we add something new to the game, and then all of a sudden on something seemingly unrelated seems to break.
It's like a house of cards almost, it seems. Like you're trying to stack...
Almost, yes.
The Bored With Nelly podcast is available on Spotify, Apple, Google Podcasts, and pretty much every platform known to man, except MySpace. Why the hell would it be on MySpace, you weirdo? Full episodes can be found on the official Bored With Nelly YouTube page.